Hello, and welcome to George Talks Business, where we at the George Washington University School of Business feature experts on current business topics. And today we are delighted to feature a distinguished panel to talk about Elevate, a partnership with the the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development, and Executive Education for Local Minority Business Enterprises. I am Vanessa Perry, Associate Dean for Faculty and Research here at the George Washington University School of Business, and I am delighted to present to you our panel. Our first panelist is Madia Brown, founder and principal of Brandire. Dr. Ayman El Tarabishy, who is Deputy Chair of the Department of Management here at the George Washington University School of Business. He's also teaching professor of management and entrepreneurship and president and CEO of the International Council for Small Business. Last but certainly not least, we have Steve Glaude, who is president and CEO of the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development. Thank you all for joining us. So let's jump right in. So Steve, can you tell us a little bit about CNHED and how you help small businesses?
Thank you, and welcome everyone. The Coalition is a citywide association that works in areas of affordable housing, small business development, workforce development, human services, and other quality of life issues. What we do for small businesses is largely try to get everyone, our city leaders, our financial sector, and others to recognize the economic engine that small businesses are. And so before I talk about what we do for them, I think it's important to kind of frame who they are. I mentioned that they are the economic engine of the city, and they are the economic engine of most cities across the world, not just in America, but in most particularly urban centers. But in DC, businesses with 100 employees or less range upwards of 73,000. And then if you look at businesses with 50 employees or less, they represent 37,000 businesses. And then if you go further down, minority businesses are about 5,500 in the District of Columbia. And so when you look at those number of businesses, the number of people that they employ, and the income that they generate, I think in DC the number is about 51 billion in revenues that they generate for our local economy, and they also employ hundreds of thousands of residents in the District of Columbia. So the one thing that's worth noting about our business sector is that more than most any other sector, they're extremely diverse. So if you look at large companies of 500 or more, companies of 100 or more, companies, 100 or less, companies of 50 or less, 20 or less, 10 or less, 5 and less, they all have very different needs. So one of the things that the Coalition does is we try to focus on businesses that have 50 or less and try to ensure that they are well represented in terms of public policy. We advocate for investments by our local government. We try to advocate for fair lending practices with our financial sector. So we essentially do public policy and advocacy work on their behalf.
Great. So how did you come to partner with us here at GWSB?
Well, as you well know, it's a kind of a loving story of engagement. But the platform for us engaging George Washington University School of Business is that we're a part of JP Morgan's National Ascend initiative. And Ascend is based on 3 pillars of engagement with small businesses across the country. And it's basically the 3 M's. There's money, there's market, and there's management. Those are seen as the 3 major needs as well as barriers for the growth of small businesses. So our community anchor partnership is the market component of Ascend, working with some of our partnering organizations, our CDFIs, will provide lending to small businesses. That represents the money. The third component is really working with a high quality, higher institution of higher education. And it's based on the premise that when large, mostly white companies need to get insights into growth or market or trends, they tend to have access to the Ivy League schools. They tend to, if a major company wants to figure out what its future business focus should be or what its access to markets should look like, they'll go to Harvard, they'll go to Yale, they'll go to Princeton and get that infusion of higher education expertise. But if you look at small businesses and if you look at minority businesses, their access to intellectual capital is probably the best way to put it, is more restricted. And so Elevate, the program that we operate with George Washington University School of Business, is our attempt to give small and minority businesses access to better organized thinking, higher intellectual capital, and formal business education, which many small and minority businesses lack.
Wow, thank you for that. So this is perfect for me to ask then Ayman to tell us a little bit more about Elevate. What are its goals and how does it differ from the other kinds of training programs that are available for small businesses?
Thank you, Professor Perry. This is a great honor to be here. This is a very important topic, and now it's in the market. Everybody's talking about entrepreneurship and small business. And more than ever, with this pandemic and what is going on today, the focus on small business should be number one. George Washington University is just celebrating its bicentennial. And if we look back at history, well, we understand that President George Washington had a vision to put a university like George Washington University in the District of Columbia. And he wanted this university to be open to everyone with the hopes of educating them, making them ready to compete in the marketplace and to be the best. With that spirit of George Washington, President George Washington and George Washington University, it was very important for us to be the neighbor for the District of Columbia and all programs to work closely with entrepreneurs and small businesses, but in particular, minority-owned businesses. Let me give you a fact. 94% of all small businesses employ 20 employees or less. 94% of all small businesses employ 20 employees or less. This is an astronomical figure, but to show how much impact the pandemic had on 94% of all businesses. Let me give you even another fact, which is even worse. Most hit of all small businesses were Black-owned businesses. They were reduced tremendously during the pandemic. Up to a point of 37.6% were affected in the pandemic in April of 2020. They rebounded a little bit to 18.4% in July. In simple terms, where everyone was affected at 7.3%, about 7% were affected, Black-owned businesses were impacted at the magnitude of 18%. This is a major figure. This is a hard fact that we at George Washington University School of Business, my role as a professor and working with Steve and his organization, we had to move in and say, how can we help these small businesses? How do we help minority-owned businesses? Another fact that I would like to give you in a point, that Black-owned minority businesses were impacted even worse than Black-owned male enterprises, with a magnitude of up to 40%. And it got a little bit better in July. But yet the numbers speak for themselves. If we have no intervention, if we did not step in and create a program like Elevate, then we would be in trouble. Elevate program is based on three key concepts: how to better design your business in the pandemic to be ready to be after the post-pandemic, how to build your business properly for the next storm or next stop of business, and how to grow your business. So we use practical learning mechanisms but also tied it to theory, but with a guide and understanding on how to explain this information to them in simple terms for them to take and run with it. Not think about it, but run with it. That is the principal program of Elevate. Practical theory applied instantaneously to make an impact. And we hope that these businesses in the program will take this and elevate their businesses to the next level, which is very critical in today because as we get more good news, now it's time for them to prepare to plan better. Thank you.
Thanks. So, did you tell us what Elevate stands for?
Yes, let me explain to you what Elevate stands for. Elevate stands for Advancing DC's High-Performing Minority Business Enterprises for Accelerated Growth. That's what it really means in simple terms, right? We elevate them.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Madia, thank you so much for joining us. It's going to be really great to hear from someone whose business has been affected by some of these trends. So if you would, please tell us about Brandire and what made you decide to become an entrepreneur.
Well, one, thank you so much for having me today. So Brandire is a creative marketing studio based in Washington, D.C., and our mission really is to help our clients convert the right audiences into the fiercest brand loyalists. And we do that in three ways. We do that by helping organizations develop strategy. We do content creation and campaign development around their marketing initiatives, and well as helping them with their engagements, their engagement activities and services. And so our mission and goal is to help our clients get results. And we've done that by helping various organizations execute marketing strategies. And we've done that for multi-million-dollar organizations that provide services for over 500,000 residents annually. And so on average, we typically help our clients get to increase their marketing results by 200%. And so we've had the privilege to work with a variety of organizations like the National Museum of African American History. We've worked with the Johns Hopkins Medicine Sibley Memorial Hospital. We've worked with the Center of Disease Control, as well as Norfolk State University and over 20 DC government agencies, just to name a few. And so what made me decide to become an entrepreneur, when I think about it, I really wanted to be an entrepreneur for as long as I can remember. When I was young, I had an uncle who had an engineering firm in the late 1980s and in the 90s. And I didn't really know what he did, but I knew that he was the cool uncle who always bought me gifts. And so that was like my first foray at kind of like understanding what a business owner is, or thinking that I knew what it was. But I realized at an early age that I had a knack for business. I started my first business at the age of 12, just with 10 cents that my dad gave me. And by the end of the week, I turned that 10 cents into $5 by starting a bracelet company. But what really made me decide that I really wanted to be an entrepreneur, when it was time for me to decide what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, it was kind of hard because I had three passions. One was, I had a love for business, obviously, but I also had a passion for art and design. I won my first art award when I was the age of 7, and I had a passion for stories, and I was a published author by the time I was the age of 13. And so when I was really looking to figure out what I wanted to do as my career, I found a career that allowed me to do two of the three things that I was passionate about: art and design. And so I became a visual journalist. I worked for the Washington Post for 13 years as a visual journalist, art director, and news editor. And while I was working in that role, I was also using my skills as a designer to help some business owners, some startups with their branding and their websites, and just kind of helping them with some initial marketing materials. And so I really started Brandire as a passion project when I was working at the Post. But while I was there, I realized that even though I was helping these business owners with their marketing and branding materials, a lot of them never really took off. Their businesses kind of failed before they even began. And so that led me on a quest to really understand, why and what role did, the services that I was offering played in helping them grow, with growing their businesses. And so in 2010, I took a sabbatical and decided to get my MBA, and really wanted to focus on the role that marketing and branding. And during that time, I learned that storytelling was a huge component of that, played in helping businesses grow. And so I took some time and really kind of learned. I became a student of marketing, branding, and design, and realized that those three elements with strategy was a huge important component to building a strong business and building a strong brand. And so I brought that knowledge back with me, and decided that I wanted to do my business full time and help to implement a lot of the things that I learned while I was getting my education and learning more about branding and business. And so that's kind of at the heart of what we do at Brandire, tying in the component of storytelling as well as the importance of marketing and having a good, strong strategy to help you grow your business.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's amazing. You did more by the time you were a teenager than I've done in my entire life, it sounds like. So, but I've got to ask you, what kind of challenges did you face as you were helping these other businesses? Since you're in the business of helping businesses, what kind of challenges did you face as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges that I faced as a business growing the same way, I've helped other businesses grow, is really that delicate balance of growth. When you're growing your business, it's, when you're first starting off as a startup, you're just trying to proof of concept, viability. Like, is your idea, what you're trying to do and put out in the world, something that could, sustain itself and sustain you and sustain your team? And so, after you've proven the fact that, what you're doing is viable, the next step is like, how do you grow and how do you scale this? And I think that that's the uncomfortable space that we are as an organization right now, is balancing how do you put together the right team, how do you put together the right systems, how do you, making sure you're understanding the numbers of the business to ensure that what you are doing is sustainable, and then how do you bring in the revenue to support all of that so it could work? And so just really, an understanding that you only have 24 hours in a day, no matter how long you make your days, that you can only get so much done, right? So understanding how to balance that has been very difficult as a business owner, because when you're transitioning from startup to growth, you're still very much in the business, but you're trying to leverage other people and other things to help to get you out of the business so that you can focus on the things and start thinking strategically on how you can grow the business. So I think that that's like the biggest challenges that I face as a business owner, trying to grow my business.
Wow. Thank you.
Things
Thank you.
in Madia's story that I think are worth noting. And some entrepreneurs have access to them, but I would argue that many that we are trying to help do not. She had an image early in life through her uncle, I believe it was. She had 13 years at the Washington Post, which gave her a view into a business, that a high-performing business operation. And then she also had advanced education specifically focused on her business. And I think those are great advantages. I wish we could replicate that experience for every entrepreneur that pursues that path, but we can't, which really speaks to the importance of Elevate. What we hope Elevate will do is replicate some of this in smaller fashion, and capture some of those things, the imagery that Madia had, some of the collective corporate experience that the faculty that will make up Elevate will offer, and ultimately that higher education view. So I love her. I love your story. I just, as I listened to it, there were three things that leapt out at me, and I said, if we could replicate even some of that through Elevate, we will serve these businesses that we hope to touch very well.
I would like to concur with Steve on this one. So we all can agree that Madia is a talented entrepreneur. We can all concur and we agree just based on her story that we can all agree on this. But what we hope to do is offer her what we call an executive leadership education, right? And to promote her venture even further, which comes back to our definition of what Elevate is, right? As she says, she doesn't have all the hours in the day. What she needs is the knowledge to create impact and instantaneous impact that can result in growing her business even further.
Yeah, and I would say that's the value, and I know we're probably skipping ahead, but that's the value of the program, is because even with the experience that I have, and even with the education I have, and even with all the things that Steve, that you mentioned, there, once you're in the trenches, you're always learning. You never stop learning. And so really then looking at the opportunities to gain the knowledge from, the experience and the professors from Elevate, and just even just the classes that we've had so far, has helped to expand and to think differently about the challenges that I even mentioned that we're going through right now as a growing organization.
So we hear so much, and Ayman talked earlier, you talked earlier about some of the statistics, but, we hear this over and over again, that about 20% of small businesses in the United States fail within the first year. And by the end of the fifth year, about 50% have failed. And by the end of 10 years, only around a third remain in business. So, if each of you would sort of talk about why you think these businesses fail. I mean, and it's clear that additional sort of executive leadership training and these kinds of things are important, and maybe in need. But what are some other factors that are responsible for these very, very high failure rates that have been consistent over time?
I'll add, and I'm sure we can all compile the list jointly. I mean, I think that there's some traditionally appreciated barriers and challenges, and I'll just list a couple. I mean, the obvious one that everyone talks about is lack of access to capital to grow. That many businesses grow to a point and they need to scale up. I would say that in some cases, both lack of access to new markets as well as inaccurate market assessment is really a big factor. There, there are so many stories of businesses who start off great working with a market that they know, that they understand, that they have access to. They can grow their number of employees to get to a certain point, but then they have to access new markets. And that's where it becomes really challenging. I would also add to that lack of managerial experience. Entrepreneurs generally have a vision about a service or what's needed. I have a great story in my past where literally a driver for a federal government agency, we always joke, he used to drive me to events when I worked for HUD, and I liked him, so I wouldn't tell him to stay in the car. I'd tell him to come into the event. I'd say, look, you're going to drive me tomorrow. Put on a suit tomorrow so you can come hang out at this reception. And one day he came to me and told me he was quitting his job as a driver. And I said, why? He said, Steve, I must have listened to too many of your speeches, but I'm going to go start not only one, but a couple of businesses. And, he literally started a daycare center. He started a landscaping company. He started a paratransit company. And I said, how did you develop these visions? And he said, Steve, I learned the hard way. If you walk outside and look around, you can see something that needs to be done that someone is willing to pay for. And so he literally launched a daycare center and a landscaping company, but he also reached a point where he had saturated the neighborhood in which he launched his business. And he struggled with accessing markets outside those businesses. So I do think of lack of market access, lack of capital are two of the big issues. But I would also add to that managerial experience, which is, again, we hope Elevate will help with some of that, to give businesses the experience and the exposure to some of the managerial concepts and best practices and executive level decision making around managerial issues that they may face.
Hmm. Thank you.
And
Ayman, I was going to ask you the same question.
Yes, and I think Steve hit on three key big points that really cause a lot of businesses to fail or stop operating, which is a little bit different, where they kind of hit the obstacles or the roadblock and saying, I cannot go any further, so I'm going to shut down the business or close the business. But there's a couple other things in the Elevate program and with GW School of Business. We bring in the cutting edge research and have some difficult conversations with them. And let me give you the latest research that's coming out that we're going to talk about is small businesses, minority-owned small businesses, and in particular, women-owned, minority-owned businesses do not have relationship with bankers, right? And with the PPE loans that just went out round 1 and 2, what the research has shown us is that access to the PPE loans was limited to minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses because they could not reach their bankers. The bankers were working with other small businesses and giving these loans out. So this is the type of conversation we're saying, have you made a call? Have you established a relationship? You continuously talk to the bankers that you have, because this is access to finance that you can get, right? And as Steve mentioned, there's a clear distinction between being an entrepreneur, which is starting a business, then managing the business, which is the daily operations, and then leading the team or leading your employees for growth. 3 roles that we usually tell the minority-owned businesses and the entrepreneurs they have to do, but sometimes they're stuck in one role, which is just starting, but they have to focus on both leading and managing. And this is where the Elevate program comes in. We talk about all three and what it takes to be in all three areas and how to succeed, really.
I agree.
Wow.
And I think that, the one thing I would add as a business owner, where I find that it's the area where it's easy to, not easy, but an area where a lot of businesses probably fail is because they don't really understand the numbers of their business. I think that when we start our business, we start because we have a passion or we have a skill and we're good at something, but we don't really, take the time to really understand, what the numbers mean in the business and how those numbers are going to help you elevate your business, for lack of a better word, to the next level. And so the idea of understanding your cash flow, understanding how you need to fill your pipeline with revenue, it goes back to that what I was saying before about that delicate balance, is that you may know that you need to bring on the team, but you also need to have a certain level of revenue coming in on a consistent basis to support them in a way where there's longevity and that you can actually build a team that's going to be able to help you. And so having a clear understanding of your numbers is important. I think that as a business owner, especially when you're first starting out, again, you're still focused on making sure that your business is viable, that the numbers, you really don't feel like the crunch to understand the numbers until you really get to that point of growth. It's like, okay, what does the number say in terms of how I can grow, how fast I can grow, how many people I can bring in, what kind of revenue I need to have in. So I think in addition to having access to capital, what I found was that getting access to capital wasn't actually that as big of a barrier as I thought it was going to be. It's understanding how to use the capital that I have to then be able to strategize in my business on what I need to invest in so that I can create capacity for myself. And so the focus that I brought in, even with my own business, is, okay, I have access to capital. What I really need is a CFO or someone who is skilled in being able to help me strategize around my numbers to understand, how do I actually use it? So I think that what I think that the Elevate program can bring as well is just, understanding, bringing that knowledge and skill set in that to help to supplement some of those areas that entrepreneurs may not typically be strong in. So I myself am a creative. Yes, I was able to get advanced education in certain skill set, but my skill isn't necessarily in those numbers. So making sure you have the right people on your team who can help fill in the gaps and help you see the big picture of your business and how you need to strategize with, when you do get capital or just with the funding that you're bringing in terms of revenue to be able to use it to grow your business.
Yep.
Wow. So I want to switch gears just for a second and hone back in on something that Ayman alluded to early on, which is about the pandemic. So Madia, you could sort of kick this off if you would. has the pandemic affected your business? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, I think that especially when the pandemic first started at the beginning of last year, it impacted my business extremely. Um, and it made me realize where there's weaknesses in my business structure and strategy and where I needed to improve. But when the pandemic first hit, it impacted my business because in marketing, that typically is the first thing that most people get rid of, or most organizations get rid of when they're facing a financial crunch as an organization. And so what I realized is that as a marketing agency at the time when people were uncertain on how the pandemic was going to affect their bottom line, a lot of the organizations that we were in talks with and had in our pipeline for revenue for the year were cutting back on investing in marketing because they realized that their revenue was uncertain. So typically marketing is an expense that people don't invest in, even though they should when there's economic uncertainty. And so for us, we had to think long and hard, one, about who our audience is, and learning the importance of diversification in the audience. So making sure that we're providing services that meet all of our different audience segments where they are, and it's not just large organizations but middle and small organizations. How can we serve them as well? So it required us to innovate in terms of our services and turning our services into products that could be purchased for those who may be looking for marketing services who may not have been able to afford our services initially. So we spent time developing products around that. We also focused on building some tech products as well that help to serve different audiences. So that was something that we worked on. But then we also realized that this really created an opportunity for diversification of our services in other ways where, because a lot of people were home and the traditional means of marketing weren't happening, it became a heavy emphasis on a lot more people doing digital marketing. And so expanding our capabilities so that we are able to do more digital marketing services and expanding our capabilities around digital advertising and all these other things that we weren't typically doing before was something that happened. And on the flip side of it, now that we're coming, around the corner, as you would say, with COVID, what we found is that there's been an uptick actually, and a lot more people realizing that they need marketing services because the traditional means of getting the word out about your businesses or about their business, they can no longer do anymore. So they're more heavily reliant on marketing and all these different tools that are available for them to use to get the word out. And so right now, what we're focusing on is making sure that we're, being more selective on who our client is and understanding, with this increase in individuals who need marketing, where do we want to specialize in? Because, we can't be a marketing agency for everyone. So just really kind of honing in on our audience and our market and understanding what are the services we want to innovate going forward.
Great. So, wow, thank you. It continues to be an amazing success story. So, Steve, you mentioned quite a bit about your policy advocacy, and Ayman talked a little bit about the PPP loan program and mentioned that one of the problems was that a lot of small businesses didn't have relationships with their banker. Actually, that was a really kind way of framing that. What many of the issues have been that a lot of the banks had capital requirements that many of your more small or disadvantaged businesses could not meet. And so they were rendered sort of ineligible for some of the PPP assistance. But I was hoping, Steve, that you would expand on how this has gone from the perspective of government intervention in terms of managing the pandemic, and what other kinds of resources could help small businesses, particularly minority-owned businesses, during this pandemic crisis.
Sure. And one real quick footnote on the small and particularly minority business response to the pandemic. I would say that it's been a tale of two cities. So in many ways, there has been yet another level of disparity discovered with the issuance of PPP and the disparity with small minority businesses being owned. I think there's two sides to it. One of the things we learned about this is not just what you said about capital requirements for getting PPP approved, but but it also highlighted something else, which is that many small businesses, they have a checking account with banks, but they don't really have a relationship. And so a lot of times, that impacts some of those yeses and some of those nos and some of those prioritized applications versus those that have just been, left. I have to say that I think beyond those issues that show disparate lending during this time, as well as issuance and approval of the payroll protection loans, I think DC government really has tried to do a great job of interpreting the needs of small businesses and the plight of small businesses during this time. They quickly stood up emergency legislation. They quickly put together an emergency small business loan as well as a grant program. It was not enough, and we well know because the level of impact was just so great. But I think that they did a really good job doing their part. I serve on several national boards, so I get a view into other cities during this whole pandemic. And I can say that our local government acted very quick, was not just reactionary, but thoughtful and strategic in its use of resources and its shifts in policy. So there's some good news is, the challenging part is that even with everything done, a lot of minority businesses were left exposed. We know for a fact that both the hospitality and the restaurant businesses were greatly impacted because they're event-driven and they're direct customer access-driven, and they were greatly impacted by the pandemic. But we also saw a lot of resilience. We've seen Black-owned catering companies convert to food trucks. We've seen maintenance companies quickly upgrade to biohazard cleaning levels so that they could still be functional during this time. We even worked with the DC Fashion Institute, which normally produces high-end Madison Avenue fashions, and help them convert to a temporary gown and mask manufacturing company to respond. So once again, people of color have had to be resilient and creative in good times, and in these tough times, we just saw that resiliency and that creativity continue. I do think that small businesses can anticipate here locally that there will be a continued focus on their evolving needs. We don't know what they all look like yet. We don't fully know what recovery looks like yet, but we do have local leaders, we have local advocates, we have locally elected and appointed officials who are not blind-eyed to the challenges and the plight of this moment. So whatever there is right now, I think that there will be more to come. The important thing, and this is where Elevate and CNHED is so important. The important thing is that we create platforms for the voices of small businesses to be heard. Closest to the problem, closest to the solution. And so to the extent that our organization and us working in partnership with George Washington can create another platform for those needs to be seen and those challenges to be illuminated, it will then equip those who care to be responsive in the resources they allocate, the policies they shift, and the programs they design.
Well, my last question is for, Ayman, since Steve, you were just talking about having the voices of small businesses heard. Ayman is head of the International Council for Small Businesses, which represents small businesses all over the world. What's on the minds of these small business owners around the world, since the pandemic is a global one?
Thank you, Vanessa here. And last April, I did an interview with the BBC. They called me and they asked me to give input on the issues that are happening in small businesses in the United States, but globally here. And I informed them, and the numbers are coming close. I said that we have to look at this pandemic in the tale of three stories. I said to them, 1/3 of small businesses will fail, will no longer continue working because of the pandemic. Then I told them another 1/3 will barely make it. They will survive. And then 1/3 will flourish and thrive during the pandemic because of their businesses, because how they operate here. The numbers have come back closely to what we saw here, that actually a lot of small businesses have closed shop. And what we're left here is with 2/3 of these businesses still operating, but 1/3 of them are barely hanging on, right? Mm-hmm. And I believe those that stayed in the game, that continued to operate, are a huge success story that we need to continue to support. They've made it. They made it through this tsunami, which is what we call the pandemic, wave 1 and wave 2, and now we see even wave 3. And they're still standing on their feet. They're barely making it, but they're trying to get as much information, as much help as possible. That is why we have an Elevate program that I was extremely excited about with Steve and CNHED, because it came at the perfect time. Why? Because now we're getting them ready for the future. And the future is bright. The future is really exciting. And we were talking to the faculty at GW here, and the biggest problem we have in the program is these entrepreneurs are networking nonstop. They're talking to each other all the time to seeking opportunities. So we're trying to give them ideas in the middle of their conversations because they're building new knowledge, creating new opportunities for them. So what's the future like? The future is a combination of digital entrepreneurship, being in the digital sphere, being in the e-commerce, but also being grounded in real businesses, is meeting people soon, I hope soon, and no more fist bumping or elbow bumping, but handshakes as we move forward here. And even more exciting, and I gave a recent speech on this, women entrepreneurs are coming more and more into businesses, even though the numbers look bad, but because of technology, because of the platform, they're seeking new opportunities. So I'm an optimist in general. I like to see the glass half full here. I think the future of entrepreneurship, the future of a small business, is a combination of digital and in-person. And I think these new technologies that are coming in will make things much faster and much more efficient. So it's a moment of celebration, but it's also a moment to kind of double down and triple down on the work that we have to do in training and educating and creating these opportunities for them to network, to be successful. And I think that's our goal with Elevate, is to really elevate our conversation, elevate our knowledge sharing to a level where they can take it and create major impact in their businesses, but more importantly, also in the community. And DC is a very special community here. This is, we are part of the DC community here. So this is really critical for us to give back to the community.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Ayman. And I just want to thank Madia for all of your insights and wonderful stories. I want to thank Steve for bringing CNHED to the table and for your help. Ayman, for all the work that you've done. And I want to invite everyone to join us for our next episode of George Talks Business, which is next Wednesday, where we will feature Tiffany Moore, Senior Vice President for Political and Industry Affairs of the Consumer Technology Association. She's also a GW alumna. I hope you can join us then. Thank you very much. Have a great week.